Hello and welcome to the CyberGeek podcast. So we'll be starting up with today how the organizations recover from an cyber incident. So what exactly happens up behind the curtains? How do the organizations recover from the cyber incident? What exactly the roles? What are the teams which teams which work on the recovery? So let's get started. Over here we got like Peter Schwacker and we got Quinn over here to discuss it further more ahead. So let's get start with the introduction. Peter, you can go first.
Sure. Thanks, Siddharth. I'm Peter Schabacher. I'm CEO of a company called Nearshore Cyber. We're based in Oaxaca, Mexico. We deliver cybersecurity services from Mexico and the Philippines to clients in the US, UK, and Europe, and we do mostly blue team, some identity, stuff like that, but we're mostly in the business of staffing SOCs, incident response teams, and things like that.
All right. Yeah.
And
Quinn, you can go for next.
yeah, my name's Quinn. I just launched my business, Blueberry Security. We do blue team in the United States.
So let's get started with my first generic question, which I do ask from my guest itself. How do you define cybersecurity according to you? Peter, you can start first.
Protecting value, period. That's all we do.
Mhm.
In
And Quinn,
in terms of
yeah,
the defenders like SOC and MDR and things like that, and a lot of people are kind of coming to this for that reason. Find bad guys, get rid of them. Nothing left to play with.
how about you, Quinn?
Yeah, I like
How
that
would you?
answer. It's pretty good. I would define it similarly. I think cybersecurity is very broad, but ultimately, yeah, we're protecting the organization from bad people, and I think that's why incident response is so cool because it's so simple. Like you're fighting the hackers, um, but like there's so much more to it. But yeah,
All right. So speaking of that, we'll be heading up with the next question. So how do you define like modern days security in terms of like a old traditional security? How would you differentiate that one?
Like how it's changed.
Yeah, over the course of time, and how does the company starts to recover with it?
Oh, in terms of recovery. Quinn, you
Yeah.
want to take that one first, or shall I?
how's it changed in the past?
Oh,
Okay, how's it changed from the past? Yeah, so I think one of the big ways that it's changing is like um legal reporting. Like a lot more times now when there's incidents, there's a lot more reporting that has to be done.
Hmm.
Legal aspects of it are becoming more complex, and CISOs are expected to report on more and more stuff. um, I think maybe before that wasn't as big of a deal. I mean, it's still huge. It has been a huge deal, but it's growing. And I think the other component of this that's growing is like cybersecurity insurance, and kind of that, because that market's growing, the way that we respond to security incidents, especially in like the SMB market or mid market, is becoming more complex, because now it's not just hiring an incident responder to clean up, it's hiring an incident responder to clean up that's approved through your insurance, and your insurance has to jump through hoops and make sure it's safe to do things.
Peter, you can explain up from your point.
yeah. I mean, there's an awful lot that's changed. One, there's just a lot more IT. There's a lot more that has to get covered. So there's increasing specialization. Like there's no such thing as a security generalist anymore. Um, there actually hasn't been for a long time. Even back when there were, we struggled with um, having enough depth in any given area to be able to make sense of it. For example, for a long time, nobody paid any attention to applications really. Most security was about at the operating system level and about sort of standard tools like or protocols like HTTP, tools like SSH, like Windows protocols and things like that. We were pretty well confined to things that we saw um, uh, in sort of universally but things like SaaS applications or custom applications were just left out of scope. That has changed. It's not that the bad guys didn't attack that stuff. We just we didn't know what to do with it. And this is going back 20, 25 years. The professionalization of the adversary has created new challenges. Now it also has created predictability. And the defenders have followed suit. This is why we have things like the Lockheed Martin cyber kill chain as a fairly reliable model for what attackers are likely to do. It's not perfect. Like nobody, you can't count on attackers being like MITRE ATT&CK framework compliant, but it's useful. The MITRE ATT&CK framework being a kind of elaboration on the kill chain. And so we have lots more tooling, we have a lot more options, but it also means it's much harder to do this work. I do a lot of recruiting. So I do consulting for companies that want to build managed services or want to like overhaul their MDRs. And a lot of the time I wind up building a team. And so I talk to a lot of people who are new to the industry and they're like, where do I start? I'm like, well, start at the bottom. Start at networking, systems administration, and then work your way up. But you've got to keep your eye on where you're going, which is being able to understand the attack surface, being able to understand what controls fit where in terms of what the adversary is likely to do. And I say likely because it's all probabilistic. We don't know what they're going to do. We take guesses as to what the attacker is going to do, and we try and get better and better at anticipating what's going to be done. But wherever they land in the grand bingo card that is the attack navigator, sorry, MITRE, that's how I think about it. You've got to have resources that understand that piece. And that these days means maybe some on-prem, most of the time cloud, SaaS, things like that. What that ultimately means is people have to be able to work together as teams. And that's probably the biggest change that we've seen over the course of the history of the field, is a shift from the security person or the incident responder as being like the person who was like given security to kind of like deal with it and sort of put them in a corner and ignore them until you really needed them, to something like what Quinn was pointing to, which is now we got to deal with lawyers. Now we have to deal with insurance. Now we have to deal with compliance. Now we have to deal with the executive team. And it creates a very different working environment.
So is it like nowadays it's like kind of difficult, or it's kind of become like easier as compared to the previous times?
That's a
That's
really
a good,
yeah.
it's
Sorry,
like
go
a
ahead.
mix.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
We've always been at the limits of our capacities. And so it's as hard as we can stand. Now, in terms of covering all of the things that we needed to cover, we're behind and we're getting further behind all the time, because IT goes faster than any human can or any team can. Businesses get more complex and more chaotic. If you look at the way businesses are run, it seems like the overquality of leadership across the board gets diluted all the time. There aren't enough people in any area that are capable of doing their jobs. Like basically, like there's so much knowledge and ability in the world and more things to spread it across. So is it harder on an individual level? Only if you try and cover all of it, but you can't. So it's not about hard, it's about possible.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that. I was gonna say, I don't know if it's been like, yeah, harder on one person because there's just so much more to do and it's so wide now. Like in an incident call, I'm gonna be talking to like 20 to 40 people sometimes, and it's gonna be like all of these different departments, like legal and compliance and the dev team who built the thing that's broken, and maybe the SOC's there and somebody's taking notes from the SOC, and then you have like 2 or 3 incident responders doing some investigations, and so it's just more, it's a team effort. I think we realize now that like how big the attack surface is, and because of how much we can see, we maybe don't know where to start. Don't know what's the best way to defend. Like, I think a lot of people are like, yeah, here's a million cybersecurity products. We can stay safe, but buying more products, buying more tools doesn't keep you safe if you're not secure in the first place. Like, one thing that I think is a big deal is like misconfigurations. Like, a big thing is in the cloud, we're all branching into the cloud, and it kind of seems like, oh, it's so secure
Mhm,
because Amazon manages it, but it's not that simple. And I think
mhm.
the confusion on smaller things like that really leads to bigger incidents.
We did, as you guys spoke up about regarding the attack vectors as well. So, what are some basic attack vectors which you would like to mention up over here, which can turn into a major source of the cyber incident?
Cloud. I think the attack vector for cloud is growing, um, because companies are moving into the cloud. They're kind of just dumping their resources in there. Um, that stuff has become less secure.
Mhm,
Threat actors are becoming more capable in the cloud, and like, I actually worked on a ransomware event recently where um,
mhm.
the threat actor understood that they had a misconfiguration in their Azure environment, and they were able to pivot in it, but and just exfiltrate all their data.
If in
Uh,
from my perspective, and people have different perspectives depending on what they get called in on. Um, it's still phishing. It's still business email compromise as a result of password dumps, password spraying, um, made possible because of either no MFA or inconsistently implemented MFA, or MFA that uses SMS, which is not a lot better than no MFA at all. It's browser exploits. It's, to some degree, it is the same as it has been for probably like 5-10 years. Um, the details of a change, and then what happens after the initial compromises occurred, has more variation in it. Like there's more happening in terms of elevation privilege and uh, uh, chains of attack, or attack chains, or
mhm.
exploit chains, than there has before. Um, and that's because it's hacking.
All right. So, speaking ahead, getting ahead with that one. So, which would be the first team would be responding to the any of the cyber incident in your organization?
Well, there's a way it's supposed to be, and then there's a way it really is. You know where I'm going with that, Quinn?
Go ahead, let's hear it.
Well, I mean, there's supposed to be like a SOC, and the
Mhm,
SOC gets an alert, and the alert's supposed to have all of the information in it, and it's supposed to like
mhm,
then tell you what to do. It doesn't work like that. The first
mhm,
responder is usually a user or a help desk person, right?
mhm,
And interestingly, like, we don't tend to think of them as part of the security team, but like most of the incidents that I hear about are, we're talking about like ransomware host-based stuff, it's a user saying something just popped up on my screen and it's scary, or the help desk. I've seen this over and over again. They're the first responder. When it comes to
mhm,
business email compromise, it usually turns into um, uh, uh, wire fraud, like
mhm.
changing the destination for wires, or making a wire happen that's not supposed to happen. In that case, it's a third party that didn't get paid because the
Mhm.
money went someplace else, or it's somebody in under the CFO's organization who was auditing transactions and found that there's a payment made to somebody and they're not supposed to be there, right? And so maybe you have someone whose background is accounting or bookkeeping, is effectively the first responder, or the controller's office. So the reality is, like, it's not the security team that gets this stuff first most of the time.
I agree.
They're the second. Yeah. What have you seen,
I
Quinn?
agree. I was gonna say, of the incidents I've worked, the smallest number of them have come from the SIM. Like, SIM detects very little, unfortunately, because companies don't set them up properly. Like deploying a SIM and getting 15,000 alerts a day in a SIM is not going to detect everything, like because analysts are going to mark them as false positives or they're going to get ignored. And more frequently, yeah, they come from other departments because somebody's already noticed something has gone wrong and now they're calling people about it.
Mhm. So we can go for like, so when does the incident response team comes in?
It really is a matter of definition. It's an
Mhm.
incident when somebody who's an authority to declare an incident declares an incident. Like when have you tended to see an incident get declared? Like who gets to do that?
So it depends on the organization, like you said. There's one organization where I worked at that was famously, they never had an incident ever,
Oh,
but yet
what?
daily I was in incident calls. Um, so the CISO, depending on how comfortable they are with declaring that, will declare it. Some companies are like very comfortable, like they'll just call everything an incident, which I think is a lot safer and healthier. Just because like it's normal, it's expected, like you shouldn't have to hide things. Um, Technically, by definition, when it's an incident by law, is when you've been breached.
Mhm. So, just one more thing. So you mentioned about the breach, right? So when do the company get to know that their data got breached or their data got compromised? So there may be some or the other point they get to know. So what exactly, how and when they get to know about that one?
How did they? Oh, sorry, I don't know if I
How
understood.
how do they get to know about that data got breached or that their data got compromised? At what
Yeah,
point?
so the interesting thing is that they'd call in a SOC analyst to do the investigation, except it just wouldn't be called an incident.
Hmm.
Sometimes they'd even bring in incident handlers, but it's still not an incident. But they would call them in pretty much all the time. Like if there's any time they hear about a vendor being compromised, or if there's like a threat that might be present in their environment, in one of the softwares they use, things like that.
Fear? Like when do you think they call up? They get
Um,
to know.
there's usually, I mean, it depends on whether it's a matter of a data breach or a breach of controls or policy. Right? You got to
Mhm.
think, one of the biggest problems we have in this business, and it's reflection of the immaturity of it and the lack of professionalization of security, is we are not clear on our words. What do we mean by breach? Like breach how? Breach of what? We tend to think of, we go to the easy answer, right, which is incomplete, and that's data breached, right? But not everybody has data exfiltrated. Sometimes
Mhm.
what you have is the compromise, or money, right? Money is kind of
Mhm.
data. It's not necessarily so. Sometimes you have a breach of controls that gives somebody's access so that they can use it later. Now, are you breached if you haven't had data go out
Mhm.
yet, or some kind of action on an objective? Depends on how you define it. I would suggest you have a breach anytime your cybersecurity policy has been violated. That
Mhm.
is a breach of the policy. Breaches of data, breaches of money, breaches of like reputational stuff,
Mhm.
right? Different kinds of breaches, but they're all
Mhm.
breaches. But it all depends on like there should be in your information security
Mhm.
policies something that defines what a breach is, so that you know when to activate it. Now, there's always room for interpretation, which is why there's always got to be somebody, hopefully defined by again by policy or by charter,
Mhm.
whose job is to say, this is a breach, it is this kind of breach, let's activate this protocol. The one we tend to think about is the one that starts with a war room. Well, I call it a war room because it sounds cool. Other people call it a an incident bridge or P1 bridge, like pick your term. um but when we think about, you know when we know we have a breach, when we have a whole lot of people on and there's an incident manager or an incident
Mhm.
commander, um, who says we have a major incident. go. Now, notice I said major. There are minor incidents as well,
Mhm.
and those are by degrees. There are incidents, and then there are events that turn out to be incidents or not incidents. So the first thing you have to do is decide, do we have an incident that's interesting? Or do we have an event which is interesting, or do we have an incident?
Mhm.
That the SOC analyst supposed to be in the triage part of the phase, supposed to make that decision. You're always doing triage though. You're always trying to make a decision that goes in one direction or the other. Do we keep going, or do we drop this? By the way, I stole that from Stephen Northcutt in 2002. This is brilliant. It's always one or the other. Keep going, or put this to bed. And one of those branches means a different course of action. I probably forgot the point of the question. Let's do another one.
Oh, I was gonna say a little bit off topic there, but I
Yeah.
think something very confusing is like a lot of ticketing systems will call everything an incident in the ticketing platform. Like ServiceNow does this, Jira does this. It's an incident,
Mhm.
but it's just a ticket,
Yeah.
and that's very
Uh,
confusing.
Yeah. And what that means, therefore, is that every team has their own way of defining these things. Like when I build a SOC, I come with a framework with about 105 topics. And I don't bring in a library of done materials. People have tried to do the SOC in a box and a wiki thing forever. And even if you do have well-written, fully documented, extremely, diagrams, all that crap and industry standard, it doesn't mean everybody understands or two agrees with it. So what I do is I say, I have questions. What do you mean by an event versus an incident? Are we going to go to ITIL? Well, people who follow ITIL don't know ITIL. An event is that which has happened. An incident is what happens when, by my definition, when something has happened that is bad, right? Or for which you don't have a process defined. And these are just rules of thumb, though. Every team has to make a decision for themselves. I like ITIL as a foundation because it's a reputable third party. Everybody says that they like ITIL. Hardly anybody actually reads the stuff. But if you begin there, then you can start deciding given how we are today and how we operate, this is how we differ from the standard. And let's write that down.
Getting ahead with the next question would be how means who does this job, isolating the affected systems and identifying removing up with the threat as well. Which team does this one? Is it like a digital forensics or like an incident responder or the
For,
admin?
for identifying the threat,
Yeah, identify and removal of threat as well.
ideally it's the SOC. Realistically, it's everybody involved because you need to know the full scope before you contain it. So when you call on the incident team, the first thing they're going to do is diagnose what is the furthest reaching computer involved. Let's say it's ransomware. We're going to look for, okay, so this threat actor is using this specific behavior to encrypt the devices or set up backdoors or whatever, and you're going to look for that indicator across every computer on the network. And then once you find a list, then I guess that's when it's contained. So the incident handling team could do that, but it should be the SOC.
My experience is usually it's just IT people. And it depends on the tooling that's available. Like if you have a really mature, well-instrumented EDR, and the SOC has access to it, a lot of the time they don't fully, they might be able to do it. But usually, and it just depends on the business impact and the extent of say compromise, you might have to bring in everybody. So give you an example. I had somebody who come to me who had 80 retail locations, and they were hit hard with some ransomware. I think it was Riot. And all their stores were down hard, and they were all over California, Oregon, all over the West Coast, maybe up to where you live, Gwen. And they need to be able to take credit cards. And so they had people, and these were Windows embedded systems. They had people driving around with CDs, reimaging machines, because that's how they did it. And it was IT people, it was store managers, So there's how you should do it, and then there's what you need to do in order to get going, and then there's after you contain this thing, eradicate it and contained it, and confirm that you contained it, right? And that's the hard part. A lot of people skip that part. This is one of the reasons you use a MITRE ATT&CK. This is one of the reasons that we see so much value in the kill chain concept, because you have to do like containment at each of those stages to some degree. Then you go to something that's kind of normal. Now, if it's really big and the compromise was occurring for a long time before you found it, you don't know where they were. And I think this is like, Quinn, you and I were talking about this the other day, like, for the past year or so, I've been getting calls from people who are like, we need a team of people to build a new data center. Why do you need to do this data center? Because we're on-prem and the attacker was in the current one for so long without monitoring and instrumentation in place to get telemetry. We don't know how deep they got. It's happened with Sony Pictures Entertainment. Like, this isn't secret. But like, they had to like replace thousands of servers. They like dumpstered them because they were pretty sure that Lazarus had, or they were concerned enough that Lazarus Group had compromised firmware. So they had to buy a whole lot of hardware, and they just put it in a new facility and then had to do some kind of cutover. I don't know. I was not involved with that one, by the way. So everything I know on that was public. But the point is that people don't really advertise the fact that they had to dump a data center, but it happens sometimes. And if you think about, you have a system that's compromised. Like, what we used to do was, you get a virus, you tweeze the virus out, you delete stuff, right? You look and you go, all right, cool. Go back to work. Your machine's clean. Do you do that today? No, you image it, right? Or you ship a new machine. You get the one back, and you like, maybe you do some forensics work on it to see what else happened, or you throw it in a drawer, and you never look at it again. So again, going back to your early questions, how things are changed. For one thing, we don't trust the tools like we used to. We don't have nearly as much faith in the ability of the technology to deal with these threats as we used to, which is unfortunate because, well, fortunate or not, it's unfortunate for the companies who have to defend against this. It's good if you want to get into the field because it means we need a lot more people.
All right. So let's get ahead with this next question. Would be like, you communicate with the stakeholder that, yeah, you got the data breach, or your systems has been affected due to the cyber incident. At what time do you mention it to the stakeholders? Like, before you start with the recovery phase, or once everything is done?
I think that'll be dictated by leadership. So, like, from my perspective, they'll probably wait till the latest possible moment because we want to collect all of the facts. Like, you want to have a very clear like report of what happened before you start making people panic, because like, nobody wants to be breached, and to be a customer who's impacted by the breach and then you don't give them facts, that's even worse.
Yeah, and one way to look at it is like, depends on who already knows, right? If people already know, I mean, this is one of the reasons you have to have a communication plan, and it can't just be linear. Like, in case of cyber incident, notify these people in these ways. No, like, somebody has to, in the same way that we have to have triage and decision making around priority and then the who and the how, we have to do the same thing with communication. And by the way, it can't be your corporate communication marketing team alone. You have to, this is why you got to have somebody like, running incident response is mostly about like being able to adapt to uncertainty and changing conditions in light of the fact that most of the people who are involved have never been involved this is before, right? Even if they're part of formal planning, if you do tabletops and stuff like that, it's still going to be new, and they're still not going to understand the ins and outs. Now, there's on one extreme though, like in terms of the continuum, I've been in lots of incidents that nobody knew about, except for a select few people who are trying to decide if they should do anything at all. Usually this shows up because somebody forwarded an email to somebody that had data in it that they should have. Most common, somebody put the wrong email address in, went to the wrong customer. People don't think of that as a breach. Like, I've seen this a lot over my career. And I would argue that probably that's like one of the most common causes of cybersecurity data breaches is fat fingering email, autocomplete errors. Happens all the time. But what happens is you have a huddle between general counsel, usually like if it's smallish company, CEO, COO, like whoever's the boss's boss, whoever sent the email, and they have to decide, like, is this material? Do we need to notify anybody? So that's on one extreme, and most of the time, like, you do nothing. The other extreme is Brian Krebs. Brian Krebs is your notification system. It's all out there, right? Data is shown up in usual public places, or the FBI calls you, the Secret Service calls you. It's out. Your customers are already getting it, but you have to plan for both scenarios and kind of like a range in between. In the end, it's like the von Moltke thing that people say is, that boxer. Everybody has a plan until they get face. A plan survives contact with the enemy. Somebody's got to facilitate the making of the call. The incident commander does not make that call, by the way. Like, incident commanders have a way of looking like gods here. We are not. We're more like Hermes, right?
Sure does feel like
yeah. Sometimes it's we get a little full of ourselves, but in the end, what the conversations take the form of, all right, bring in the CMO and general counsel and all the technical people here. You're excused for the next 30 minutes. Come back in half an hour. Right. And let's have a conversation about the impact to the business, the impact to employees. Right. When you mentioned this earlier, causing a panic is a thing. This used to be a much bigger deal with mass mailers, by the way. When mass mailers were a thing back in like 05, 10, kind of ended when spam kind of went out of fashion. An awful lot of money was lost due to disruption because people were like dealing with their mail getting jammed up, or because they were hearing about it getting jammed up and they're talking about it. And because people were talking about it, they weren't doing their jobs. Right. So that's a thing.
We'll go ahead with the next question. I'll just take up with the example, like if we go for like WannaCry ransomware or Bad Rabbit attack, which happened up like 2 to 4 years back somewhere. So what were your reactions for that time? It's like how cautious you were with your system and with your organizations at that time. I guess Quinn, you were working up with an organization at that time. So how what were your
I don't
what were
I
your
don't know if I
challenges at that time?
was. I'm pretty new to the industry, I'll be honest. I was
All right.
promoted 3 times at the same company within 3 months. Um,
Damn,
so
that's
I've
pretty
been in
interesting.
this industry for 5 years.
All right. Peter, you might be aware of these two attacks which happened up. So you might be the correct one to answer up. Means what were your challenges at that time? And there is one more actually, like recently, like Log 404, which came up recently, which was executed directly into the server, which used to like change with the server commands with the executions as well. So what were
I can talk
your
about Log4Shell.
Yeah, are we talking
yeah,
Log4Shell or or something else? I'm not
yeah.
sure. I know that. Oh, okay. Yeah. Oh, wow. Log4Shell was weird. Okay. So they call it the news because it's new and it's unusual. Most of what we deal with is not new or unusual. The
Mhm,
things that make the news are usually not actually relevant to what people do on the ground.
mhm,
For example, like in the cyber trade press, we hear a lot about Russia, Ukraine.
mhm,
I don't do much in Russia, Ukraine, so it doesn't really affect me directly. It's entertaining. The war is certainly tragic, but like on a day-to-day basis, in terms of what I do, don't care. WannaCry, really interesting, super interesting. Sandworm, great book. That was
mhm.
WannaCry, not Petya, and it had some lessons. Read Greenberg, set aside, get back to work. Because what we do every day is largely not about that. But it's not to say that there aren't useful lessons. Now, how that stuff tends to affect us is we have to explain it to people. And they provide they provide lessons in what to do, what not to do. But like WannaCry was weird because it didn't actually do anything, really. I mean, it encrypted stuff, but there was no like, it didn't ask for money, right? There was nothing you could do about it there. NotPetya had to do with like some parts of the world that most of us are not in. But the Log4Shell was super weird because suddenly the whole world was aware of a vulnerability, and we
Yeah.
were all thinking, "Is this wormable?" Right? That was the thing that had everybody on edge. And was it wormable? Like potentially, but it didn't happen that way. What it pointed to was problems in software bill of materials being a need, maybe, but then how do you manage those? How do you actually bring those down to something you could do? It raised vulnerability to a much higher level of awareness, and it gave everybody the ability to say, "Look, dummy, where's our CMDB?" Which has been answered to some extent. If you were Tenable, Rapid7, or Qualys, like that made your year. But for the rest of us, it basically just destroyed our holiday season.
Oh yeah, it was terrible. You know, the funny thing about Log4Shell too is that it was discovered in Minecraft. Like
Uh,
it
yeah, I got to know.
Yeah.
I know. Because
it,
I still play Minecraft as well.
yeah. Well, and me too, but
Yeah. Well, and I shouldn't say that. I don't want to leave anybody with the impression that like Log4Shell wasn't important. There have been lots of breaches around it. I mean, I've had more than a few incidents that were made possible because of Log4Shell. But it didn't grow as broadly as we all thought it would. It was the targets that were hit were things like VMware Horizon. I had a few of those, right? Why? Because people were had it on the internet, right? And it exposed a major problem in the sort of the foundations of open source software and therefore the internet, which is that Log4j is, maintained by like two dudes who do it on the
Well,
side, and it's everywhere, right? And that exposed a sort of a major problem across software in general, which is like nobody knows what the hell they're running.
speaking of that, even I used to do some kind of research previously as well. So I got to know about like Bangladesh bank heist over there. Like what they did was like there's like a Central Bank of Bangladesh,
Mhm.
and what the attackers used was like they made like multiple Swift requests. They pretended they were from like IMF or like a World Bank. They pretended they were from World Bank,
Mhm.
and they were no, actually they were like pretending some of the other organization, and they raised request to transfer the money, and they were able to manage up like transfer around like 80 million something straight from the World Bank through the Bangladesh bank, and they took all the money into their accounts, and all those money went traced back to the Mauritius.
Yeah. Well, and that was we know who that was. It was Lazarus Group, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's and people worry a lot of still about the Swift network and the systems that on which it runs. But the interesting thing about Swift is it's like there's an awful lot of attention paid to it. Like it's extremely
Mhm.
important, and it still got hit. Like you would think that it wouldn't be subject to those kinds of vulnerabilities given how much power one has having compromised it, and yet it still happen. It's not like the people running it are dummies. They're really smart.
Actually, there's like a whole lot of there's a entire documentary which is on YouTube itself. I do watch it like I did watch it like couple of times itself till now. I do still watch like to get read about it more and more. Like sometimes whenever I get time, I just go watch the documentary continuously. It's like a Bangladesh money heist or something. It's
Yeah.
like that.
Well,
So it's like
there's a podcast. I forgot who produces it. It's on Lazarus Group
Mhm.
and involved the Sony Pictures Entertainment incident, which people around who work that I know some of them. But yeah, it's good stuff. Great stories. And thank goodness for that.
Yeah.
If we didn't have the stories, I don't know what we would do. They make it makes us like okay.
Yeah, and I
Okay.
love story time, especially when it's like not on a public forum and you can talk about like the crazy stuff that happened, like the crazy stuff.
Yeah. So let's get ahead with the next one. So I've seen like I know a bit of about like a digital forensics. Even I do kind of like a digital forensics as well. What I do is like I change up some of the other codes into the operating system, and what I do is like I take the changed code and I do have like a couple of softwares like for the operating system to compare like two operating system, the actual one and one which got changed one. So with that I used to get like a lot of things here and there. So let and going up ahead with this one, the next question would be from my side would be like with the evidence of preservation, like how do you preserve those evidences? Means at this maybe like to analyze those evidence, how would you do those things? Is there any tools or AI tools or something, or do you guys do with manually, like backtracking those evidences?
I don't use AI tools. I think AI is not something that's going to be embraced by the security community very
Mhm,
easily. It's it's like it's like if you are in a home invasion, so if somebody's coming to break into your home, you want to have your weapon in your hand. You want to have your finger on the trigger on your gun. Like I don't know if AI is going to easily be adopted just because like we want to know how it's happening and what's happening and like yeah, sure, like doing things with AI is great, but how much of it are we comfortable with letting AI do alone?
Yeah.
mhm,
To paraphrase Solzhenitsyn, you shouldn't, when you're being attacked by dogs, do not call on the wolves. AI just creates more problems. But to get to your point, what do you do when you need to preserve evidence? Well, the first thing you're going to ask is, you need to? Is it
mhm,
necessary? Usually,
mhm,
it take they're when it comes to hosts you can get your hands on, they're forensics tools that are good at that, at getting snapshots of things, getting disk images, getting memory images.
mhm,
I hardly ever deal with that stuff, frankly, because most of the time, certainly unless since the cloud era started,
mhm,
that stuff's in the cloud, and you have backups and you have snapshots and things like that. And most forensics in the cloud is logs. You're looking at
yeah,
logs. There are too many logs, right?
Yeah.
And you're trying to corral those things. Um, but my first point is, I think, really crucial, which is, all right, who you can prosecute? Do you even care to prosecute? And if you're not going to do that, do you bother? And do you make the investment in training and tooling in case you might need to? Particularly given like attribution is so hard, right? Um, even if you can do it and you can find somebody, um, are you going to get them like on an Interpol list and nab them? I mean, I know things like that. I was not directly involved. One of the first cyber incidents I became aware of up close was one where somebody stole $15 million from a certain bank, and they were in Russia, early 90s, and I'm sorry, late 90s. And somebody, I guess Scotland Yard or whatever, got them in Heathrow because they were lured to UK, right? But that was
mhm,
$15 million, and they managed to get back all but 400K of it. But that's even today kind of, I mean, you hear about takedowns and you hear about people getting arrested, but like, again, the news is news because it's new, it's unusual. But what happens really day to day is,
mhm,
um, incident response process is basically like, something happened, figure out the magnitude of it, right? Figure out what the potential, the impact is to the business and the potential impact of the business. Involve the right people, apply the right actions, make sure that you have as much of the attack or the cyber attack kill chain covered as possible, and then figure out how to get back to business, how to get back to something like normal, and then find out what you did wrong and what you could have done better. That's a thing called lessons learned that a lot of people leave out. That is not the last phase of the incident. It is formally, but the remediation that comes after that that's where it's hard. The hardest part is after all the shouting's over, and you have to get back to something like normal life. It's also where most of the work is, by the way. I know a lot of your, much of your audience is people who want to get into this field. And the hot part of the incident, very brief, maybe a few days, maybe a few hours, maybe a couple of weeks. The tail that is making sure that it doesn't happen again, there's a lot more work there.
So the next question is like from one of my audience itself. It's like, to what extent would they outsource their infrastructure, and how do they manage the liability when the infrastructure is compromised?
You want that one, Quinn, or you want me to take it?
Could you repeat it?
Sure. To what extent would they outsource their infrastructure, and how do they manage the liability when the infrastructure is compromised?
So your question is like, when companies outsource pieces of their business, so are you asking if the outsourced stuff gets compromised?
Yeah,
Okay,
and to what
so that's really difficult and hard to deal with because it's not your infrastructure, but your data's in there. A lot of times you're just sitting around and waiting. Like I've seen that a lot, especially for financial clients. Like maybe your vendor that handles your customer service is compromised and they have all of your customers' personal information. They have phone numbers, emails, maybe even social security numbers. And you just can't do anything. You just wait, because if you go to that third party and you're like, can you tell me like what's going on? Like hello? Like they're just gonna give you the same thing, which is, we don't know yet. We've informed you there's an incident. We're collecting the facts. We'll tell you soon. Which is very hard to deal with. Like to be frank, like that sucks. Like when you're in that position. But that's the price you pay for outsourcing your labor.
Yeah, the problem with it is that infrastructure is typically doesn't come with security. Like you don't really attack infrastructure, really. I mean, you sort of can, but it's not really where the action is. What matters most is like contracts, vendor relationships, contracts that can last years. And switching from one infrastructure provider to another isn't really generally going to get you much, unless somebody's going to then like include security. Security is like, by its very nature, always going to be kind of a bolt-on. Like everybody says that you should integrate with everything. It doesn't work like that, because the people who understand security are not necessarily the people who do infrastructure and excel at making things go and making things stable and making things fast and making things cheap have completely different priorities than the people whose job it is to make them secure. And so there's always a kind of necessary tension between security and everybody else. Part of it comes from the fact that you can't know all of it. You can't be good at both. Nobody can, individually and also organizationally. The organizations have enough people to do that, tend to be ungainly, awkward, and have a hard time getting anything done. And then there's like layers and layers and layers of costs on top of it. So we have, it's scale problems, it's the diversity of IT problems, and then ultimately it's like, how do you make all these people coordinate? So usually like infrastructure stays in place. If anything gets changed out, it's the specialty organizations that do security, like assessors or tools or managed security service providers, MDR providers, stuff like that.
So speaking about getting ahead with the next one, be like password resets and patch remediation. So how is it like every possible system, or is it like only the affected systems? So how does these things goes up? So it's like you guys do it with like each and every system in the network and each and every system in the organization, or does it go with only with the affected ones?
It depends on the scope of the incident. And that's one of the first things you do is scope the incident. Like, what does this involve? What does it not
Mhm,
involve? Usually we try to color outside the lines a little bit, maybe a
mhm,
lot. But this is also why like things like threat intelligence matter. Like, what is
mhm,
this attacker likely to do that we're not seeing yet? And so you have to, there are risk decisions behind that. In a couple of the cases I mentioned, the examples, people got rid of whole data centers because they didn't know. That's fairly extreme. In
mhm.
others, like you have a machine that seems to have malware on it, or seems to be compromised. Just get that one. It wasn't even on a LAN. It's in somebody's house. They didn't VPN in. Just deal with that, right? But you have scope is an inevitable question that has to be dealt with. But when in doubt, like you go a little broader. So you have one user whose credentials were compromised. Okay, reset their account, make sure that MFA is enforced. You have two. Okay, is there a pattern here? Are there five? All right, everybody's getting it.
Mhm.
So that's how it tends to go. You look for patterns and trying to make predictions.
Quinn?
You repeat the question. I'm
So,
sorry.
it's okay. I was like, patch and remediation and the password reset. So, when do is it like you do with only with the affected ones, or do you change up with the entire organization?
Only the affected ones, yeah. Um, so if there's like business email compromise, I would you don't want to go throughout the entire organization resetting 10,000 passwords. It's just too much work. It's gonna waste a lot of people's time. Um,
Mhm.
as far as like patch management, like everything needs to be patched, right? Like everything needs to be up to date. Um, a lot of times companies can't do that. Like a lot of times there might be like outdated resources that have some kind of
Hmm.
like legacy software on them that can't be updated, and that's when I think there's a real issue. Um, I guess did that answer your
All right,
question?
sure. Yeah,
Yeah,
that will
yeah,
do.
yeah. I'm going to actually add one thing, and a very common mistake is people mix up attacks. What I
Hmm.
mean specifically that by that is somebody's Microsoft 365 gets compromised, or some cloud things get compromised. Um, and is a credential attack that is confined to data, and we know what data they got because we got logs. And then they say, we got to like reimage all these machines. I'm like, they didn't hit the machine.
What?
They got credentials. They did not actually touch your laptop. And so, in addition to like number of systems or accounts, you got to ask like, what was the nature of the attack? What did it deal with? And this is why we find so much use in frameworks. This is why we find so much use in, again, cyber threat intelligence. Um, but but it's not just about like how broad, but how, what depth, what ways.
So, getting ahead, that's like one question I was like kind of being skeptical. I don't know, you guys might have heard about like software reselling and accounts reselling. So I did hear about that, and I recently met a person as well when I was in London. At that time, he was the owner of that company. He was like he used to resell the softwares, the cybersecurity software. So what
So
exactly is it like? Till what extent do you guys feel safe with that one?
so I just want to understand, is this like a business question in terms of like me selling CrowdStrike?
Yeah.
Okay. Um, I guess Peter, do you want to start with that one?
Doesn't matter. I mean, it's like buying direct from a manufacturer and buying through a reseller is just a matter of contracts and
Yeah,
and procurement. It's not. It doesn't impact security.
yeah, I don't think so either.
So, all right. So that goes with almost end of my all the questions till now. And the next one would be like, what are the potential job roles which does comes up under this one? Like, which teams like someone can go for?
Oh, for jobs?
Yeah, in this like post recovery sessions and everything.
I don't know. What are you hiring for, Quinn?
I'm not hiring.
Yet, yet. Um,
So my business model is really focused on blue team. I actually have we do free penetration testing, which we haven't really worked out the details to that yet, but um, I have a penetration testing team. I don't know how to market them. If we ever
Mhm.
figure that out, I'm sure we'll be hiring for that. But it's
All right.
all unpaid, so I'm going to build a team of interns.
Probably my video can help you with hiring process. Someone or the other might ping you later, ping you on your LinkedIn.
yeah.
Okay,
That
yeah,
will
I
help
mean,
you.
like I said, it's not happening yet. I have to
Yeah.
figure out how to market that. So
No, this will be the. I guess I can help you with that one then. Don't worry about that one.
Yeah.
Uh, So that comes up. Just one last thing. Is there any like kind of certifications or something like that? Like I did one like digital forensics. I do have one certification in digital forensics. Is there any other one which you can ping up for the viewers?
Yeah, the only one to me that really matters is
Hmm.
the SANS DFIR stuff, which is crazy expensive, unfortunately. But that's one of the reasons it's good. People tend to really concentrate on it because they spend so much money. It's also really hard.
Hmm.
There are lots of other ones, but frankly, like, and I got to go in like a minute. And so I'm going to leave your audience with this. The best way into security is not through security. The best way in security is not through the front door. It is not the way the people are selling you training tell you to get in. They're selling you training. They're not selling you a reliable career path. The best way in is through a side door or through something like systems administration, network administration, project management, IT finance, IT architecture.
Hmm.
Why do I say that? Because for one thing, they're not sexy. They are fun. Like we operate a Linux user group. Nearshore Cyber has this thing that we do every Sunday.
Hmm.
We do, you know, what I find when I interview people is I talk to people who know the security words and have done the security courses. They don't know anything about IT. And I
yeah,
have to tell them like, come to a lug meeting, like learn how TCP IP works, you know, Linux,
Hmm.
Windows System Administration, Active Directory, which I would argue is security, but a lot of people don't think it is. Directory
Hmm.
service is important. Networking, like know how to read packets, stuff like that. As for certifications, don't care. Because if you come to me and you want a job doing that, I'm going to audition you. I don't really care what your certification is. What I want to know, do you have a lab? Do you work with other
Hmm.
people? Do you have open source projects? Like Quinn, did Quinn started a company?
Hmm.
Like that's a big move. That's impressive,
thank
right?
you.
And so people who are doing stuff in the world that they can demonstrate and show what their efforts look like, as a hiring manager, that's what I want to see because I can't evaluate anything else. And certifications, I love certs. It's a good way for me to prove that I know something. I don't know that you learn
Hmm.
anything from it.
And I know we're at time, but my perspective is a little bit different. For me, I didn't have an IT job before I got into cyber. I'm not selling trainings, I'm not selling guides. My only advice is follow your heart. Like if
Yeah.
you truly believe you can break into cyber and you have enough background IT experience just from growing up, you should do it. I walked into a business asking for a job and they said, we'll hire you. The first place I walked into hired me. Now that being said, it was more complicated than that. Like I got lucky. I had like other things going on, but I think if you put yourself in the right place and you market yourself correctly and you do have the skills that you need, you can do it. Um, you don't have to come in through a side door, but that's most likely how it's going to happen. Like if you don't have IT experience and you work at CVS and
Hmm.
or you're a cashier at some place, like you have to be realistic about it. help desk gives you necessary experience. Network, network engineering positions gives you relevant experience.
Yeah.